We need to be ready to fight. This fight is coming, depending on how far this goes. We will go to the extent of cutting off their energy.
Nothing is off the table for British Columbia as part of a unified Canadian effort to respond to these unjustified tariffs.
The best choice right now for Mr. Trudeau is to table a plan with money. I prefer that than starting a war and stopping sending energy to the United States.
Well, let me be clear from the Alberta perspective. Under no circumstances will Alberta agree to cut off oil and gas exports.
4 different premiers and 4 very different takes on how to respond to the tariff threat. Now, Donald Trump has threatened to slap a 25% blanket tariff on all Canadian imports. So can Canada avoid those tariffs? And should we clap back by cutting off oil, gas, and electricity exports south of the border? Our front bench is back. Christy Clark, Mar and Gary Doer. Christy, Stephen Lecce said that Premier Ford is just preparing, but was what he said going too far?
I thought your interview with Stephen Lecce was really good. I thought he did a really good job of explaining what's going on. I think the issue for me is this comparison between Alberta not saying they don't want to cut off exports with Ontario saying they potentially would. And of course, the difference is very material. Ontario has the most diversified economy in the country. Ontario Power Corporation is 100% owned by the province of Ontario. It's not a private sector organization. And so when Doug Ford says he could find a way to potentially do that, there's a lot less potential damage to the Ontario economy. In Alberta, it's a completely different situation. You're talking about private sector businesses whose access to the market would be cut off in a province where oil and gas is by far the biggest contributor to economic growth. So it's not a surprise at all that the two premiers would have taken different positions. And I think it's perfectly legitimate, as Stephen Lecce said. Every province has its own ability to be able to do something. And each one of them is going to choose to do something different. And maybe some will choose to do nothing at all. But I think Doug Ford has proven himself to be brave in getting out there and taking this position. And it's going to be up to the Prime Minister to decide how he wants to manage kind of the basket of menu items that various premiers are going to give him. And in different provinces, it'll legitimately be different things.
But Gary Doer, is that sort of nuance something that can be properly communicated to somebody like Donald Trump? Or does he see that type of division from the different premiers and even that threat of cutting energy exports? Does he see that in a different way than maybe Christy produced it or described it there, where it is more nuanced?
Well, I think it's still early. He hasn't even been sworn in yet in how he sees it, but he did respond at the New York Stock Exchange this morning, and that's good. I think the Premier Ford has been chair of the Council of the Federation. I think they've done a really good job of being united on the border, demanding that we get better protection at the border from our federal government. Looks like they're going to achieve a united result with $1 billion being announced. Perhaps on Monday. I think he's done a very good job on getting all the premiers to talk about the 2% NATO commitment in their communications south. I think we should up our game as premiers. As a former premier, I think we should up our game with governors. I think Premier Smith was wise to go to the Western Governors meeting. Those of us on this panel right now have all been to Western Governors meetings. There's an Eastern governors group. There's the Midwestern governors group. They're really good to work with. And today, the governors run the economies in the states. It's not the senators in Washington. So I don't want us to lose when we're announcing a potential reaction to Trump. I hope we're not losing the governors that we may need down the road that are running the economies. For example, most governors would be really worried about if Ontario announced that they weren't going to buy any more liquor in the United States. They're the largest purchaser of liquor in the world. And we use that actually for country of origin legislation with tariffs on California to get a positive result for Canada. But I think I'm not sure The threat is one thing, and the president reacting to it is another. Premier Ford going on Fox and Premier Smith going on Fox, I think, is really good. But we also have reliability agreements where if there's a shortage in one state or province, the other state or province ships it back to the other jurisdiction. So I don't know what the due diligence is here. When you're dealing with electricity, you're dealing with rates, you're doing your renewability, but you're also dealing with reliability. You also have to look at why are we having a fight with the state instead of Trump? Because we have Line 5 coming from Alberta all the way through to Ontario, through Michigan. And, so I hope they've thought these things out. I hope the media is asking those questions. But I think Premier Ford has done a good job with the Council of the Federation. He's got some good results from that. There's going to be other splits. Items like dairy are going to split this country a bit regionally, but hopefully they can manage a united front in the United States. And part of that united front is with governors. Believe me.
Gary, Mar, I want to talk a little bit about the lack of cohesiveness in the messaging. And I say that because yesterday, Premier Ford criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for weighing in on the results of the U.S. election in a speech that he made at Equal Voice, which is it was an event promoting female participation in politics. But then you look at Ford kind of sort of step out a little bit. Is that something that somebody like President-elect Trump sees, understands, and says, well, look, they can't get their house in order. They're not really on the same page. It doesn't feel like it's a Team Canada a Team Canada that's sticking together through this right now.
Well, I think that the meeting that the Prime Minister had with the premiers, by and large, created two key messages that I think there is unity on. One is, both the premiers and the Prime Minister have agreed that there has to be a strengthening of our border. I think that's a given. Number two is that, they all want to fight hard to deal with the issue of potential tariffs from the president-elect. As Christy said, there are different strategies. Gary's identified the same thing. If the Ontario Liquor Control Board decided to stop buying bourbon, I'm sure that the people in the state of Kentucky, Governor Beshear, would be thinking twice about whether this was going to be a good idea to take on Canada. And, I think that it's also true that each province has certain things that they will go out and do that can still fall within the overall ambit of what a Team Canada approach looks like. If you look at what, both Premier Ford and Premier Smith have done to reach out, in the case of Premier Smith, meeting with the Western Governors Association, also joining a compact of 12 U.S. states that produce energy, to Premier Canoe, who has talked about moving conservation officers into the role of, taking care of upping the border. I think this is good. You've got Premier Eby, Premier Moe, all of whom have something important to say about how they would contribute to the overall objective of securing the border and dealing with fentanyl and with the issue of fighting back hard against the tariffs and standing up for what each province has in their best interests. And it should not be understated what Gary Doer talked about is that we really have to up our commitment to our spending on defense. And it's difficult to do until you get the procurement system fixed with the military. But that is a relatively simple fix. We get that done, and then we can start procuring things. And, maybe there needs to be the kind of, sort of all-out effort where somebody like, the Minister of Defense, Blair, goes to, a Lockheed Martin facility and says, we're taking 88 of these F-35 fighter jets. Now, we don't get them until 2029. But if you had that kind of imagery on Fox television, perhaps you're satisfying the president-elect's snack tooth for what he needs and says, I did that. They're buying those because of me. May not be true, but because it was a previous commitment. But you might do the same thing.
But it may not matter.
Going to a place like General Atomic and saying, we're buying 2 billion of these drones from General Atomic. And you have, the kind of imagery where the Canadian government is in front of, a line of drones that are going to be deployed for the defense of the Arctic.
Gary, sorry, I got to leave it there. We are all out of time for this. Christy Clark, Mar, Gary Doer, thank you so much for being on the front bench. We're going to be right back. We're taking a quick commercial break.